I'm Dr. Yosefa Fogel-Rubel. This is a podcast episode brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. Parshat Vayakel is the beginning of the repair parshiot, where the Torah illustrates for us what it looks like to crawl out of our own mess and rise to the occasion, to rebuild what we had destroyed. Of course, I do not mean that the Israelites physically destroyed the Mishkan, but that they desecrated all that it stood for. When trust is broken in a relationship, it takes time, a lot of time and effort to rebuild it. In Parshiot, Truma, and Tetzaveh, the description started with furnishings and then described the building construction. But here the order is reversed. There, the ark was mentioned first, symbolizing the focal point of the Mishkan. But here, the pragmatics take precedence. What must practically come first is the edifice, the building. The emphasis in these chapters is both on the fulfillment of Moshe's instructions and the roles of B'Tselel and Oholiav, much more than the previous parshiot covering the same topics. We have the clear sense that just as the second set of luchot are created by human hands, so too the Mishkan's construction has been handed over to their hands. Before I introduce today's guest, I just want to remind all of our listeners that sponsoring a podcast is a wonderful way to mark any occasion. Write me at podcast@matan.org.il or check out the donation webpage on the Matan website, or you can contact the office directly. Today, I am thrilled to welcome a new guest, Rabbanit Batya Hefter, who is the founder of Lev Nachon, Center for Transformative Torah, whose focus is to transmit the teachings of Hassidic masters into a vital, ethical, and spiritual path for the modern seeking Jew. She is the founding Rosh Beit Midrash of the Women's Beit Midrash of Efrat and Gush Etzion, where she served as spiritual leader and executive director for 2 decades. Batya just completed the manuscript of her first forthcoming book, Opening the Window, Hassidic Readings for Life, the Teachings of Rabbi Yaakov Leiner of Ishbitz Radzin. Rabbanit Batya, it is an honor to have you here today.
Thank you, Yosefa. It's really fun to be here. I'm looking forward.
Before we jump into our Parsha and our modern commentator today of the Mei Hashiloach, I wanted to know if you could just share a few words about this center that you have spearheaded, about Lev Nachon.
Thanks for the opportunity. First, I'd like to say a word about Lev Nachon. After having teaching women for many, many years, we sat down together and passed around a piece of paper, and we said, this Torah that you care about so much, what would you want to call it? And out of that emerged Lev Nachon, which doesn't mean a true or correct heart, but it means a heart that is aligned, meaning that every day when we wake up, we need to align our heart. We need to see where we're holding. And that became the best description of how we felt is our Avodat Hashem that we need to do every day. We need to figure out where we are, and then every day the Torah really provides for us a path, a way of being, and a way to correct and realign ourselves, whether it's in our interpersonal relationships between each other, in our workplaces, with God, with mitzvot, that it's a continuous path. And that's sort of opens up towards the type of work and teaching, the way in which I would like to be focusing my work in teaching Torah, which I think that the Hassidic masters, particularly Chassidut Ishbitz Radzin, offer us a path to be able to align ourselves. So that's kind of the big gadol. The center itself right now is mostly online courses and also teachings in Hitbodedut and Jewish meditative practices. And also we do meet occasionally together, and Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope that will develop. It's being expanded and developed at this time.
We've had a few episodes in this series on modern commentators where we've sort of explored some of the more modern Chassiduyot, or the Chassiduyot that have been studied more, right? There's this great colliding of worlds in the world we have today, that on one hand, the introspection of the self, which has come from like a world of individualism, which of course was not the birthplace of Chassidut, but those kind of texts that are so internal and so honest have really sort of combined in this beautiful way with a lot of the modern tides of the world. It's sort of like this perfect storm that's been created. And I'm curious if you could also tell us a little bit about the Mei Hashiloach. We heard about his son 2 weeks ago, but I'd love to hear more about him maybe a little bit also why he's studied less or thought of sometimes as being pretty revolutionary, or that you have to have a certain degree of maturity, whether it's spiritual or theological, in order to open up his works and be able to actually appreciate them.
Wow, so this is a good opportunity to be able to speak about Reb Mordechai Yosef. I've been carrying around his book for 40 years. I don't go any place without his book. Even when I climbed to the top of Kilimanjaro, I took his book with me. I want to respond first to the whole notion about what you said about individualism. And the reason why I would say Polish Chassidut, of which Reb Mordechai Yosef was a part, was an intellectual revolution within the Hassidic world. For that, people can look at Alan Brill's Thinking God, where he does a beautiful job exploring that and describing the differences. Here, the Rebbe was not a magic figure who gave out blessings or a conduit to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, which to a certain extent absolved you of your personal responsibility. On the contrary, the Rebbe, the position of the Rebbe was to inspire with each individual to find their own unique path, precisely because that's the only way in which you can do Avodat Hashem. The firm belief that a person has a nefesh, that kol echad v'echad, each individual has a tzelem Elokim, and that their own tzelem Elokim is chelek elo mima'al mamash, a portion of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, was believed in the most profound way, that each person has to find their own individual path, and therefore this collection and group of, I would say, both intellectual and spiritual seekers, their relationship with the Rebbe is the Rebbe would reflect within them what it is that they all need to do in their own personal path. And I think that's why, as I understand it, the Ishbitz masters, the Mei Hashiloach, the founder of the Ishbitz Razin dynasty, are so crucial today. 40 years ago, you couldn't find his book. I found his book. I have 4 different volumes. I have 4 different madurot of his book. I found it in a skinny volume of the Mei Hashiloach in a back shelf of Lichtenstein and Holder 40 years ago, and now you can find their books. And no one had heard of Rabbi Yaakov and had found them. They were only in that dynasty, and now it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. So their time has come. So that's kind of in this intellectual revolution of Polish Chassidut. A word about Rabbi Yaakov. About Reb Mordechai Yosef. Reb Mordechai Yosef Leiner was born in 1800. There's disputes, 1800, 1801, died in 1854 in the town of Tomashov. And he's the founder of the Ishbitz dynasty. He was the Talmid of Reb Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, and subsequently, upon his death, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kutsk. Now, the Reb Simcha Bunim said about the Mei Hashiloach that his waters flow slowly but penetrate to the deepest depths, and that's why his book is called the Mei Hashiloach. In 1939, there was a public falling out between him and the Kutzker, and Reb Mordechai Yosef left to form his own circle. That particular, the details of that his abruptly leaving his teacher and the famous enigmatic Kutzker Rebbe and to find his own court can be read in All in the Hands of Heavens by Morris Feuerstein and in Ora Wiskin's book, The Wisdom of the Heart. His main Talmidim were Rabbi Yehuda Leib Eiger. His grandson was Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Rav Tzadok Cohen of Lublin, and his son, Rabbi Yaakov Leiner. His grandson, Rav Gershon Chanukhenich, is the one who actually wrote down and published the works in these 2 slim volumes known as the Mei Hashiloach. I also remember when I had my time really appreciating and learning the ideas of Rav Hutner, I noticed that many of the ideas in Rav Hutner were actually almost direct quotes from the Mei Hashiloach, although the Mei Hashiloach's works are not credited in Rav Hutner. So now Reb Mordechai Yosef received a lot of attention due to what was considered to be the radical nature of his teachings regarding free will and sin. The statement, all is in the hands of God, even the fear of God, led many people to incorrectly think that he believed ultimately that individuals are absolved of responsibility for their sinful actions. This is not the place to get involved with that. Mm-hmm. But frankly, I think that that's much less interesting than the value of exposing the deepest textual, psychological, and spiritual insights that he has to offer on the Torah and how that can become a derech avoda. I just want to take just one moment to describe the goals of his book. the Mei Hashiloach, and in the introduction of his book, it's written that again, beyond all of teaching Pshat and Drash and on all the different aspects of Torah, he says this: Ech kol divrei Torah shayachim lechol adam befrat. What it is that I want to teach and show is that how all of the words of the Torah are shayach. The word shayach is very interesting. It doesn't just mean belong to each individual, but they are of you. They are a part of you. They're about your being, how they are shayach to you. V'kol ha'me'uraot hanizkarim b'Torah hem shayachim l'chol adam, right? All of the events in the Torah really speaking about, the mythical layers of existence, that they are part of your being. U'lechol adam ve'ovdim al kol nefesh b'chol dor v'dor. And these are a part of us in every single generation. U'mimena nikach la'avod et Hashem. So this is is a shift, is an orientation of how it is that we need to relate and experience Torah. And finally, I just want to say a word also in the introduction, what he says about the goal, that the goal of Torah Hanistar, what I would say, I just say something, the hidden teachings of the Torah, the idea isn't that they're, mysterious and mystical and magical in any kind of way. It just means they're hidden from your consciousness. Mm-hmm. It simply just means they're out of the realm of what you understand, and what is beyond the realm of what we understand we call choshech, and that's how they relate to the choshech. There's the choshech and the or. There's what's outside of the realms of your consciousness and awareness, and there's what's in, and avodat Hashem is to expand your perception. So what he writes is that his goal was to laharbitz Torah lerabim, ad shalamad v'hivin v'limed dat hatalmidim, sheyavinu divrei Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai v'ha'arizal komo shemevinim pshutei divrei halacha. His goal was that people would become so familiar. He would cultivate and build a structure so it would become so clear that you could understand these things as you would understand Pshutei Halacha. And about that, it just reminds me of one other thing important for people to know. I think what's extraordinary about the Mei Hashiloach, and the reason why people, I think, gravitate towards it, he doesn't use Kabbalistic jargon. Right? Basically, what he does is he explains the hidden ideas through the narrative so that you can see. I gave a course for many years, 10 years, called Pshat and Beyond. I used to hide the Hassidic masters, said, everyone wants to hear what's the Pshat. So I said, Pshat and Beyond. Take people from what they know, what's familiar to them, and little by little take them step by step, as the Medrash does also, and bring them to the deeper layers and understanding so they can slowly see a progression from the Pshat to the deeper meaning. So that's very, very often, I think, what happens in the Mei Hashiloach. And I hope that our conversation today will be an example of that.
I have a lot of thoughts as you're speaking, but I guess the only one I'll share for now is that something that sort of speaks to what we spoke about before we started recording, which is that we really need both of those sides. Meaning today we live in a world where there's still a very strong rational element that exists in our world, whether it's, evidence-based medicine, which I'll use just as like a catchphrase. And then you have so many people who are walking around with an awareness that there's so much of the world that's present that we can't see. And I feel that, the world, for all different reasons, has come to a place, right? There's many people walking around, whether that's what they also believe about their own personal health, or that's also meaning they're interested really in what's behind the psukim and less sort of in what the psukim are saying in front of them. And that ultimately there needs to be sort of this wedding of these two. And so you have many people who were, as you would say, Pshat-oriented people who at a certain point said, wait a minute, I'm definitely missing something, meaning I'm here and I'm getting a certain level, but I need to add another level. And by that same token, there are people walking around who, I'm just going to keep it in the Torah world. We're not going to talk about health. That's a different podcast. Maybe one day I'll do. But in the Torah world, where the Chassidut can sometimes be felt that it's not with depth because it's not necessarily being anchored properly, either in the world that it's coming from and the text itself, or also, I'm just going to go back to a word that we said before we started recording, in like the rigor that the drasha is really working with, meaning that there's so many layers of and knowledge that a person is sort of assumed to have before they're walking in and to read the quote unquote walking in to read this drasha, that I think that the wedding of those two is really important for both the limud of psukim and, that which is revealed or known in the world can be appreciated, and also for the quote unquote hidden, or that which we're not yet conscious of, can also feel that it's anchored in something that is strong and that has strong foundations.
So Yosef, I'm really glad that you brought that up. I would say I've dedicated my life's work really to trying to wed those two, meaning I'm fully aware that for, at least in the traditional community that are familiar with texts, there's a certain suspicion, sometimes even, of Hasidic texts. And then some people who want to see, they want to see how it's built and how it's structured. So first of all, it's just important to understand that the depths of Hasidic texts really can only be understood and cracked open. The assumption being that we understand Pshat, that we understand that we've read the Midrashim, that we understand.
They were
halacha.
Talmudic masters.
They were Talmidei Chachamim.
Yes.
The assumption is that one understands and is involved and engaged in the world of halacha, in Talmudic discourse. And then there's also a whole structure of I would say, language in Kabbalistic discourse, which they translated into more accessible terminology. Certainly, Mei Hashiloach per se and Rabbi Yaakov moved out of that jargon and translated it more into, I would say, existential language, and shared those ideas through literary devices. So, all of that is assumed when you approach their texts, which it gives that there's tremendous layers and depth in what they're saying. They don't always explain it all, so one has to go mining to figure it out.
Okay, so why don't we jump into this week's Parsha? Okay, you take us into wherever that feels right for the arc of this conversation.
So in Parshat Vayakel, there's a very interesting verb that I really would like to bring some of our attention to. And it has to do with the appointment of Bezalel. Why is the appointment of Bezalel so important? It's clear that he's singled out in a particular way. And when God speaks to Moshe, he says to him, Re'eh, karati b'shem Bezalel, ben Uri, ben Chor, l'matei Yehuda, v'emaleh oto ruach Elohim b'chokhmah u'b'tuvuna, u'b'dat u'b'kol melacha. Now, re'eh it's an unusual verb. See that I have called upon Bezalel. And then we have the same thing when God then Moshe speaks directly to the people, asking the people to see that God has chosen Bezalel. Vayom Moshe b'nei Yisrael re'u, kara Hashem b'shem Bezalel. And the question that it brings me to ask is, why does the Torah use the language re'eh and re'u? Why doesn't it say, as it might say in other places, Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, kachet Bezalel, or just simply karati b'shem Bezalel? Right? What is this indicating? And moreover, re'eh it's an imperative. It's a command to see something. Now, I notice that also in Parshat Truma, Moshe himself has this problem, where it says in Parshat Truma in Shmot Kaf He Pasuk Mem, Re'eh ve'aseh b'tavnitam asher ata mar'eh bahar. Right? God says to him, see the structure which I have shown you on the har, and on the mountain. And in that, Rashi himself says, what do you mean? Re'eh v'aseh. Re'eh kan bahar tavnit sh'ani mar'eh otcha magid. Shenitkashe Moshe b'maseh hamenorah. In other words, there was something that Moshe didn't understand. So we have that unusual word, re'eh, also by Moshe, that he didn't understand something, and God had to show it to him. There was this additional, there's something unclear, something that he didn't understand. So I guess my first question about this was, what is this doing here? Why do we need re'eh?
I'll just add one more layer, if that's okay. That where it says re'eh karati b'shem Bezalel, which is in Parshat Ki Tisa. So it's interesting because the paragraph right after that's when they have this shattering, right? That they see things. Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe laredet min hahar. Meaning, first it has this. Here's this viewing. Here's another leader. We're gonna shine a spotlight on somebody else who's not Moshe. And then a paragraph later, obviously not immediately after, but a paragraph later, we have the people realizing that Moshe isn't here and he's gone. And so I feel like, in theory, this is not a podcast on Kisisa. We already did that. But the presentation of B'Tselel was supposed to, even in theory, be this understanding that there are going to be multiple leaders who will be in the limelight of Am Yisrael. And that's something, for so many reasons, that the people weren't able to see, right? They were just having their eyes on Moshe, and that led them to be very confused. I just wanted to add in that one more place where we see this verb of vayar, which isn't always necessarily a significant verb, but I think in this case it very likely is, that there's something in their vision, in their way that they're looking at the reality, that got them into big trouble when it came to Chetei Egel. And this whole process that they're going through is going to, physically they have to build a new structure, perhaps, if you're going according to the Ramban and not Rashi and that machloket, but also that they have to start seeing things differently, and that's going to be their whole journey in the desert of having to view their leaders differently and to slowly view themselves differently, and to be able to see themselves as agents of their own life and not just recipients of something grand. So just throwing out that idea also.
Yeah, no, that's really spot on, because I think what's being brought up here is how do we cultivate a way of being, a way of seeing? And that's also why I think that these ideas are so contemporary and so modern. Particularly, we live in a time where I think the way of thinking on the road is that everything is subjective. Perception is completely subjective, as if there's nothing objective out there. In a religious context, we understand that there is. We assume that there is something objective out there to be had. But those of us who tend to be more modern in our thinking, we understand that we all have a different lens and a different way of seeing. And I think that the particular teaching that I want to bring today, the Mei Hashiloach is talking about, is really the question behind it is, can we cultivate a spiritual consciousness? Can we cultivate a way of seeing? So that's what's behind it, about the ru'u, see. The Medrash in the Tanchuma actually speaks about, it talks about Moshe is misjudged. Moshe is misjudged by the people. And there seems to be no indication, really, although you've mentioned it a bit in Parshat Kitisa also, why would they misjudge him, and why would the Medrash include that piece of information here where it doesn't seem to be so warranted? And the Medrash in the Tanchuma says, Vayomer Moshe el b'nei Yisrael ru'u kara Hashem b'shem B'Tzalel. Without reading the whole Midrash basically says that Moshe Rabbeinu, after God tells him all of the details, he says, okay, well, who's going to make all of this? And he thinks he's going to make it, because it says V'asita. He thinks he's going to make it. And God says, Kara Hashem b'shem B'Tzalel. No, it's not going to be you. It's going to be B'Tzalel. B'Tzalel, who is B'Tselel, right? B'Tzalel is the shadow of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and you could say in some sense, then he'd be able to reflect as accurately as possible some ephemeral aspect of a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That's a unique quality of B'Tzalel. And then when Moshe Rabbeinu comes down from the mountain, he tells them all about this, and they say, who's going to make this? Who's going to make this Mishkan? And he says, it's going to be B'Tzalel. And the Medrash then imagines, in the Midrashic imagination, they imagine the people are all rebelling against Moshe, accusing him of nepotism. You chose Aharon HaKohen to be the Kohen Gadol, and you gave his children to be the Kohanim, and you have Elazar, who's the Nasi, and now you're picking B'Tzalel as Miriam's great-great-grandson. It's all in the family. And in here in the Medrash has Moshe Rabbeinu saying, first of all, it's just so painful. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu is the most misunderstood figure. He's certainly the most misunderstood and the most unappreciated leader in the Torah. And he comes forward and he says, Ru'u. And so here there's a bakasha here. There's a request. it's transformed from a you could say an imperative, but to almost like a request. See, can't you see? And the Medrash brings in that Moshe Rabbeinu, in this sense, desires to not be appreciated only by Hashem, but that the people should be able to see. So that's the first push forward of how the Medrash opens up this see. And I asked myself the question: what is the value of such a reading? Right, the Medrash is not recording history about what happened. The Medrash is, what's the agenda? So, on the one hand, it has an ethical agenda that Moshe Rabbeinu wants to somehow have the people see the truth. But beyond that, what's standing behind that is what is the value of such a reading? To which I see again and again in Midrash and in Midrashei Chazal, we're really emphasizing external impressions and internal realities. That there's an incongruence between these two realities of life. There's what's going on the outside, the world of appearances, the world of judgment, and the world of appearances. And there's a deeper reality to be seen and to be perceived. But this narrow-minded way of viewing doesn't allow them to see past these appearances. So that's the first push of the Re'u of what.
There's something so ironic about the fact that Moshe is the one who, is so deeply misunderstood. Meaning, on one hand, it's obvious because he's such a deep, he's our deepest figure, right? He has the highest level he's attained the highest level of spirituality. So, of course, no one else is going to really understand who Moshe is. They can't possibly understand what that means. They can't grasp that. On the other hand, it's also interesting, and here the Midrash brings it in, but of course it appears in the Psukim as well, in the story of Korach, and otherwise it's also bringing up to my mind, Shmuel, when he's very insulted about the fact that Am Yisrael wants a king, and he says, I never took anything from anybody, that you have leaders who, even though they are on this high level of connection with God, are still very disturbed by the fact that the people do not perceive them properly, meaning they're disturbed by the gap and the disparity between what the people are able to perceive and what they really know they are. And so it sort of speaks to this, there's sort of like this rift in communication. And I'm not even sure that the people possess that ability, but I guess I find it also, I don't know if surprising, but it's tragic, because then Moshe's just sad. No one gets me, and that's the price of all the leaders who always feel alone, right? Because you are sitting at a different space, you're occupying a different space, and the people can't really possibly get you. I don't know, this Midrash, really threw me straight to the Korach story, also because the complaint in the Midrash here is as well that you're keeping it within the family.
Sure. Lama titnasu kahal Hashem. So that's again also part of how is it that the Midrash could possibly make this suggestion? Well, we have it throughout Sefer Bamidbar. Yeah. The most unappreciated, misunderstood person is Moshe Rabbeinu, not only by Korach, where it says exactly this claim, Lama titnasu kahal Hashem. Why do you raise yourself above everyone else? But also, very sadly, Miriam and Aharon also has said, Rak b'cha diber, gam banu diber, right? God also spoke to us. There's also over there is an extraordinary Mei Hashiloach, absolutely extraordinary Mei Hashiloach, where because, so to speak, Moshe and Miriam sin in that they don't understand the difference between themselves and Moshe Rabbeinu. So there's an extraordinary Mei Hashiloach which says, Adaber bo, I don't speak to him through chidot. I don't speak to him indirectly. To Moshe Rabbeinu, I speak to him directly. Now, you could say, of what good of help is that? To tell them that. If it's intellectual information, it doesn't help them. It's actually quite related to this text also. Over there, Moshe Rabbeinu actually, God comes and then says to them, he allows them to see when he says, Adaber bo. With Moshe, I don't speak to him bichidot, right, through riddles. I speak to him directly. Pet el pet adaber bo. And at that moment, when God says to them, Adaber bo, he allows them to experience how Moshe experiences God. So it's mind-blowing and that's what the Hasidus is about. Hasidus is not about telling you information about spirituality. It's about trying to bring you in, trying to unpack it, trying to allow you to experience that. And the pain of Moshe is he doesn't want to give them information. He doesn't want to say, God picked Bezalel. He's the one who has the the qualities. He wants them to see, Re'u, I want you to be able to experience, and that's where we're going to be headed here. He wants to try to help them experience what he knows always to be true. And so that's the loneliness that you're speaking about. The loneliness is that Moshe Rabbeinu and the spiritual figures who are so connected live in a reality where you could say the divine reality is apparent to them. And that is clear to them. That's panim el panim, right? As you mentioned at the end of the Torah, Lokam Navi od b'Yisrael asher diber im Hashem panim el panim. Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to Hashem panim el panim, and there we also have the power in Parshat Kitisa that Moshe Rabbeinu we'll speak about that a bit later. He's karan or panav, and he has a masveh. Right? His face is luminous, and he's not even aware of it. And the people are terrified to approach him, so he has to put on his face a masveh. He has to hide his face. And in some sense, Moshe Rabbeinu's face is hidden, and his presence is hidden. His divine qualities are hidden from the people, because if they were able to perceive his divine qualities, they would never be able to say to him. It's only because Moshe Rabbeinu's interior divine qualities are hidden from them that they could possibly accuse him of nepotism. So where I'd like to take you is the Mei Hashiloach picks up on Midrash, but then he takes it a step further. And it's that step deeper and further where I'd like to share with you. And what the Mei Hashiloach wants to do is he says, Re'u, I want you to be able to see, meaning I would like to cultivate within you. In this particular case, it's an artistic ability. But the deeper thing we're talking about is to be able to cultivate an ability to be able to see beyond appearances. And he says specifically, Hainu im tistaklu be'ayin tova. If you could please only look, if you can look be'ayin tova, you could say with a kind eye, tir'u sheratzon Hashem yitbarach, you'll be able to see that God's will is shebetzalel hu ikar b'melechet hamishkan. Although there are many artisans, you'll be able to see that he's the main singer on the stage. Right? It's like he's not part of the chorus, right? So he is the real master artisan. And then he actually brings up an example. He says, Hainu al yedei shetikchu hayiriyah she'atza b'tzalel neged hayiriyah she'atza acherim tiru shelezeh yesh chen v'tiferet yoter mikulam. I want you to be able to see the chen and the tiferet. I want you to be able to see the beauty, the glory. It's something ephemeral. It's something you can't put your fingers on. But he says, if I actually pick up two tapestries, and he continues to say that they're identical. You can say, what's the difference between them? This one has the same amount of strings, that one has the same amount of strings. This one has the same colors, this one has the same amount of colors. I don't see the difference. Right? But Moshe Rabbeinu is urging them to be able to see beyond appearances. And this is something we struggle with. This is something you can only gesture towards, and the language that he uses that perhaps gives some concrete, some degree of tangible way in which we can grasp this. He's calling it an ayin tova, and he's calling it a lashon havana shetavino. Now, an ayin tova as opposed to tsarut ayin. Tsarut ayin is generally, we use these terms very often in ethical sensibilities and less in spiritual sensibilities, although there are overlap. But a tsarut ayin would be, I see things only from my narrow perspective, and I'm sure that what I see is correct because that's how I perceive, or that's what I'm suffering. I can't see past that. And then the tovat ayin then is gesturing past. Although I may experience and understand things and line it up this way, the tovat ayin requires an extension of chesed, that there's something that I am aware that I don't grasp the full picture, and there's something else out there to be had. And that requires havana shetavinu shebibatzela b'char Hashem. They have to extend, to a certain extent, they have to extend Moshe Rabbeinu some chesed. They have to extend them, they have to come to a place of havana. Now the lashon of bina is a quality which is kilu gam lachshov davar mitoch davar. We use in halachic language that things somehow make sense. One has to be able to see the intricacies. So one has to see that there's a certain coherent whole. That's what understanding is. I take all of the specific details and somehow it coheres. Bina is that there is something bigger that's holding all of the parts. And it is that intangible quality of its holding all of the parts, which is, I would say, as you see in a moment, that's the God quality that's hidden in the Chokhmah and the Bina that Kadosh Baruch Hu invested within Betzalel, or is able to perceive in Betzalel, that Betzalel would be able to weave, so to speak, into these tapestries. Now, these are very, one can easily say, what are you talking about? This is the same as this. I don't see the difference, right? But someone who has that ability, has to cultivate that facility, can say, oh my, wow, I really didn't know, It's a chavaya, a sense of beauty, a sense of what. It's actually fascinating also because Tiferet is also the midah of emet. And that's also maybe beyond the scope here of our work, but it's very, very important because Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, God's name, is associated with Tiferet. And I think it's something people often don't understand. Elohim is associated with Din, but Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is associated with Tiferet and beauty, because when everything makes sense, right? It's when it's not just law in terms of Din, it's a bigger and broader coherent picture, which in some sense only a Kadosh Baruch Hu has. But there's a whole coherence, and when that happens, there is somewhat of an aha experience that one acknowledges a certain hitgalut of that which is hidden, which appears at that moment, and that's what Moshe is trying to help them see that.
So just a few things that are coming up. So first of all, I just want to go back for a minute to the pasuk to make sure that all of our listeners, if they're also a tabula rasa like I am in the world of Chassidut, to make sure that they put something together, which is that on a simple reading of Re'eh Karati B'Shem B'Tzelel Ben Uri, in a simple reading, I haven't read it, but I'm sure probably Kasuto says it's sort of, and here he is presenting Betzalel, right? Like it's almost like a bringing him in. But what the Mei Hashiloach, the Tanchuma really begins is saying that Re'eh doesn't mean, and here is the guy who's going to do it, but it means you can learn to perceive, you can gain a skill of perception of beauty through this person. And so it's just reading that word entirely differently, but it's also reading what Betzalel is supposed to sort of represent for the people by seeing it, meaning he is supposed to...
why he was chosen.
He's supposed to be able to help them acquire a different kind of vision that they didn't have before. Now, as you're speaking about the word Re'eh, so it's sending me to two places, and there are two places that are connected, okay? So one of them is Vayal Hashem Ki Tov. Okay, meaning in the creation of the world, and that's, whenever I teach that, it's not an ethical judgment. God does not need to judge whether or not his son, the sun, is, or the moon, or the grass are good or bad. That's not what the word means. It can't mean that, but it means exactly what you're saying, meaning God does this thing, because we're eventually supposed to do that ourselves, or at the end of the day, he looks around and says, this coheres. Everything is in its right place. And for people to be able to come to that kind of perspective takes a lot of work, meaning we notice disharmony and cacophony before we're able to see things that cohere. Now, it appropriately sends me, and this, I promise this connects to what we're saying, to Yocheved. Because she says, she sees, and it's supposed to be an allusion to the story of the creation, because there's multiple allusions there to the creation stories. And she sees that her son Moshe is Ki Tov. The Midrash hits the nail on the head and says that she perceived in him that he was unique, meaning it's that exact ability to see beyond what is physically representational. Because you have Parshanim who say, what did she see? I think it was Shadal who says, he was a really great baby, meaning he was really well behaved, or right? Meaning Vayal Ki Tov, she was able to hide him. No, because it makes sense. She was able to hide him because he didn't cry, because he was really easy, because he was born a preemie, if we're going to mix in some other things that are said there. But one of the Midrashim says is that she saw that he was unique, right? She saw that there was something about him that needed to be saved. And I'll just end this thread by saying that recently I was speaking to someone about my kids, and I feel that one of the things that is like the gift of having multiple/many children is that if you work on it, you start honing in on all these skills that, oh my goodness, as a first time or second time mother, I did not have them. But like, my son was born and I said, this is a child with so much chen. I mean, you just literally, like, I couldn't look at him and not see it. There was like a mitikut about him. Now, my children are wonderful. They're great. They're strong. All my children have totally different personalities, but there was a sweetness about him that I have never seen on other children of mine. And I said to someone, I said, yeah, don't you see that? I mean, it's right there. And they're like, what are you talking about? I see big eyes. I see a baby who's so cute. And I said, no, but it's right there. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're talking about, I think. Mm-hmm. You're speaking about being able to sort of click in to other levels of perception that we often have to cultivate. There's some people that are born with really, profound amounts of perception and can see and connect to so many layers. But a lot of us work on sort of being able to see those kinds of layers of the world.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that you're sharing, but I would make one adjustment in terms of, it's not just that there's another mode of perception, it is the essence of perception. It is the heart of perception. And then I'll just give a plug, because I think that the masters are at the heart of what the Torah is. Yes, of course it also means presenting. But is that what the Torah comes to teach us? Presenting B'Tzalel. That's a reasonable pshat reading. But it is not the depth of what the Torah has to offer us. That's not the answer to what I opened up with, is that chayav kol echad ve'echad bifrat, that each person as an individual has to ask of themselves, what is the Torah teaching me today and right now? Why is it shayach l'kol adam ve'adam? Why is the Torah teaching me something right now that I need for myself and for my life? And when you're talking about the kitov and the kitov, yes, that's how the Torah talks to itself, right? So that the essence of the tov, the tov of the world for which God created is manifest in the personality of Moshe. But I want to come back now to something very important about Moshe, which is the inyan of the masveh and the veil, Moshe Rabbeinu's veil, and with that also the Mei Hashiloach wants to say more. Not just that I want you to see B'Tzalel b'ayin tova, but there's actually something much, much deeper. And really the pain of the world here is that not only do the people are not able to see B'Tzalel, he says, V'zah inyan hayad sel Moshe Rabbeinu, af shelo hayalo, right? Also Moshe Rabbeinu. They couldn't see Moshe Rabbeinu, right? They perceived him incorrectly. They couldn't see the beauty, the hadar, which was hidden in Moshe Rabbeinu. And moreover, in some sense, you're going to see, they can't see God in the world. That's the real thing, is that they can't see Hashem in the world. And here I'd like to just come for a moment. It's an extraordinary drasha. I'm not a big fan of gematriot. I understand some people find them interesting, some people find them, irritating. But we do have a Masoret of gematriot. What's interesting about it is really more the concept, less than the numerical formulations. Although one does need to respect that we do have a Masoret of it. And here he says something fascinating. Now, I want to just remind us in Parshat Ki Tisa, we have in the end of Parshat Ki Tisa, Moshe Rabbeinu, as we know, puts on his face. He comes down from the mountain, and his face is karan or panav, and people were afraid to approach him. And then in Perik Lamed Dalid, Pasuk Lamed Gimel, we have Vayachal Moshe medaber itam, vayiten al panav masveh. After he's speaking to the people, he places upon his face a masveh, a veil. Ubivo Moshe lifnei Hashem ledaber ito vayasir et masveh. When Moshe Rabbeinu comes to speak to God, he removes the veil ad seito, until he leaves the Mishkan. Vayetze vayedaber al bnei Yisrael asher itzuva. And all of the people v'ra'u, now they see. Uru'u b'nei Yisrael et pnei Moshe ki karan or pnei Moshe. And now the people see. At this moment, somehow the veil was removed, and they can see the luminous face of Moshe. V'hishiv Moshe tamasvel panav ad bo ledaber ito. And he replaced this veil. So I want to speak for a moment about this veil. And this is just a very general, important concept in Chassidut, which is called livushim. in English we might call it garbing, right? Now veils and garbing and clothing are very important. Clothing and a veil both reveal and conceal. I mean, I think particularly in the religious world, we use clothing hopefully in an immodest and appropriate way, both to be able to appear in the world appropriately, both to reveal ourselves as we wish to identify and reveal ourselves, and also to conceal ourselves. So it has this double meaning of clothing, of veiling, which is to reveal and conceal. And here there's an extraordinary gematria which sees that the word masveh, which is veil, is the combination of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Hashem's personal, intimate, hidden name, and Shem Elokecha. Okay, I'm not going to go through the math with you, unless you want me to.
It's okay.
So it's this combination
we'll trust
of.
You.
You'll trust me on the masveh. The mem hey is Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, and the samech vav is Elokecha. But what's interesting is what they're trying to say, that the masveh is a combination, both conceptually and numerically coded, right? It is conceptually a combination of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, that which is hidden, right? The hidden inner meaning, which is concealed, but it somehow is coherent. And Elokecha, now Elokecha is likened onto, people know that Elokecha is Midat Hadin, but also, as you just said in the first parak in Bereshit, you only have Elokim, nature. That is the aspect of God which is revealed.
Yeah, the universal aspect.
The universal aspect of God, or even the physical aspect of God which is revealed. The question is, also, you could say, can one see HaKadosh Baruch Hu being mistater? You say God's veil is nature. Right? Nature is God's veil. And the question is, Ru'u, Kara Hashem b'Shem B'Tzalel. What he's asking is not only, Ru'u, see B'Tzalel, can you see the beauty? Can you see the coherence and the gifts and the divine qualities of the B'Tzalel? Ru'u, can you see me? Not only that, of course, I'm, it's to Lina Kotet that small Lin Sachem V'Sechel Tov Be'eni Elohim Ba'Adam, that of course he's ethically pure. But can you see the divinity, the beauty, the Lechavod V'Tifaret, which also resides within Moshe Rabbeinu? Can you see that? And most importantly, what Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to get them to do, which he says, Mi Shehaya Mistakel Ba'ain Tova, somebody who is able to cultivate within themselves a kind eye, Haya Ro'eh, Shekol Ma'asav Hayu L'Shem Shamayim, could see Moshe in the depths of who he is. But I wanted to finish the thought that what Moshe Rabbeinu wants to do is to cultivate within the people the ability to be able to see God hiding behind things in the world. What it reminds me of is many times as I was running the Beit Midrash and bringing in many different people to teach. And there were people who I had tremendous amount of respect for. And as painful as it is to say, Moshe Rabbeinu, he didn't have charisma. The charisma was Aharon HaKohen. Kvad peh, kvad lashon. He can speak directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he couldn't speak to the people. Right? Aharon HaKohen, Aharon HaKohen will speak for you. So Moshe Rabbeinu's Hadar, his beauty, was inside, it was internal, it was hidden. And those people who had enough capacity to be able to see it had the awe and the fear of Moshe. They always saw it, and perhaps Yoshua and Aharon. But most people they didn't see it. It was like, cholef over. Maybe at the moment we see in Parshat Kitisa, they were overwhelmed and they had fear. But once the Masveh went on, they couldn't see past appearances. And what it reminds me of in the Beit Midrash, there were precious, precious, wise, deep people who I wanted to bring to come to speak to people. And very often I would have to prompt everyone and say, this is someone you really need to hear, but you have to make an effort. You have to incline your ear. I would say that goes back also to Moshe Rabbeinu at the beginning of the Sneh. It says, Vayar kisar lir'ot, that Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen by God because Moshe Rabbeinu chose to see. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu, there's a beautiful midrash that says, Ikemit sevaro.
Yeah.
Right? He twisted his neck. And I would say that in order for us to be able to learn Torah, in order for us to be able to see the depths of what's hidden behind the veil, which very often appears to just be a veil of appearances, we have to take tremendous efforts to be able to see beyond that veil. We have to twist our neck, we be able to see beyond the appearances. So in that particular context, I remember feeling quite frustrated and sad at times that I would bring such extraordinary people, and people didn't always have the ability to hear and appreciate the depths of some really great thinkers. And then I think the question that brings us to where I opened up, is this something, Moshe Rabbeinu, can we cultivate a spiritual awareness? Can we? And I think that's an important question. And as you'd mentioned before, that maybe, people are always interested in, experience. I'm talking about things that are deep and layered. And of course, it comes with responsibility and obligations. And it is not something that can come without all of that depth. But those are questions that I think we need to ask ourselves. And I think that this particular teaching, certainly, I would say the Mei Hashiloach is reading Moshe Rabbeinu as a Rebbe. The Moshe Rabbeinu is the Rebbe, and he's trying to get the people to see, see, can you please see past the veil, see, the veil which both conceals and reveals. And I would say that we live in a world, our reality is a world of the veil. Our reality is the world of a veil. We can just see the details, which are disconnected, which are on the seichel, and that also goes to another thing that you'd mentioned earlier, which I would just like to mention also. Chassidus is not anti-rational. Certainly not this type of Chassidus. It's not only anti-rational. It just means that there is a limit to what our reason can grasp. And reason is crucial and important, the ability to understand words and to go through the text and to be particular and specific. But that is only a piece of the picture. And what's important here is that the details have to be in the service of the whole. Elokim and the details has to be in the service of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, not the opposite. They are in a hierarchy, and one takes precedence over the other. And the pnimiyut is actually, I would say, the same thing as in a relationship. Of course, in a relationship, you get married because you're devoted and because you love someone. And there's all of the details of life are crucial and important. But the relationship is what holds that's the glue that holds everything together, and it has to be nurtured. And so too, our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the details and the halacha has to be in the service of Hashem. It can't replace Hashem. And I think that this is what the Mei Hashiloach is gesturing towards through Moshe Rabbeinu. I think it's a fantastic pshat reading. I very often say that I think the masters are omek hapshat, and the Mei Hashiloach, I think very often, and the Beit Yaakov od yoter amok, omek hapshat. They bring us to the deepest depths of that's why it's called Mei Hashiloach. The waters are slow and they go deep. And they bring us to the deepest places of existential meaning and religious experience, which we need to maintain and deepen our relationship with Hashem and the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And we walk around with this masveh always, and hopefully we can be able to see past the masveh, through the masveh, with the masveh. We're not disregarding the details. We have them.
That particular episode of the Masveh is one of those places where even if you're a really pshat-oriented learner and you don't have another layer in there, it's one of those places, there's a whole bunch of them in the Torah, where you are just totally at a loss for what to do with it. Meaning, I've like, as a fun sort of exercise, I looked at a few different sort of modern commentaries on this episode, and I was preparing something for a class I was teaching, and I was like, wow, that really falls short. Meaning, it's one of these moments where even if you're not a deep Hasidic learner, you really got to go there. Meaning, you got to start at the Midrash and then you got to keep going, because it's simply not something that the disciplines of rational thinking are going to have the language to understand it. So that's also just a call in general. Meaning, and I speak to myself as someone who loves, I love the world of academic Tanakh study and Pshat study, but you always have to know when you've reached your limits and when those skills, you're saying don't stop there, you can't stop there, you have to go to the Pnimiyut. And I'm saying even for someone who wants to stop there are just some places where there is no language to describe. So you have to go to a different kind of discipline. And as you're speaking about the Ayin Tovah, I guess I was thinking sort of in a practical way, because you're speaking about Ayin Tovah, that they have to be able to see deeper. They have to be able to see deeper layers. And I feel like as I'm imagining it when you're speaking, I'm thinking of a panoramic vision of to see broader and then to see deeper. Why do I say that? Because I find a lot of times that one of the first ways that you can start accessing a deeper understanding certainly of people and then of the world, is first by broadening your perspective of who they are. Like whenever I have a hard time with somebody, I'm always like, I got to have a one-on-one conversation with them. This happens to me sometimes with students, I'll be honest. And then I find that when I sit with them one-on-one, it's always way better afterwards, because I'm a one-on-one kind of person, but also because I understand them in their context, and then immediately I start, feel softer towards them, and the thing that might have rubbed me the wrong way, doesn't anymore. And then I gain respect, because I realize that them coming here doing that thing is so out of their comfort zone, and it just shifts the entire perspective. So to me, that's like a first layer of Ayin Tovah, is to like broaden your perspective of whatever you're seeing, see it in its context, understand it more. And that can like open up the gateway into seeing something also in a deeper way. It's not in place of going deep, as we've been describing, but I feel like sometimes it's almost just like a practical way to be able to start connecting with something that feels far beyond our reach, is to sort of broaden the way we see it, so that we can then maybe even access it from a different access point, because the ones that are visible are sort of repelling or uninteresting, but then we can get it from a different angle. I don't know if any of that was clear, but
no, that's beautiful. It really, really speaks to me. It's yes, I don't mean to. Actually, I'm not sure. Deep might be, these are all. We exchange one word for another. Deep could be broad, and that brings us to a broader understanding. What you're bringing me to is actually why I called my book "Opening the Window." I was debating to call it like "Expand Your Lens." I wasn't sure how to translate it, but that's because I unbelievably impacted by Rabbi Yaakov's teaching, where he says, "Kol avodat Adam hu laharchiv et hachalon," which just blew me away. That our avoda, the way in which we serve Hashem, is by understanding that the way that we perceive reality is really limited. And all of our avoda is just about expanding our lens. It's just about seeing things in a broader place. So what that means is that when you sit down and have that conversation, and you have that Ayin Tovah to say, you know what, I wasn't having such a good feeling, I need to expand my lens, and you have that encounter, that's a real encounter. Yeah. There's nothing to take away from that. We don't need to like have spirituality somehow belong to something which doesn't belong to our world and our daily happenings. I think it's a beautiful, practical, real example of how we constantly expand that lens, and that's what's being suggested here in terms of Ru'u.
Rabbanit Batya Hefter, it's been a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for expanding our lens and our ability to both see verses that might have seemed simple at the start, and to be able to start seeing the layers that are underneath them. Thank you.
Thank you, Safa. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode from Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact the Matan office or email me at podcast@matan.org.il. Please do us and all women's Torah learning a favor and share this episode with all of your friends and family.